Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis, delighted to welcome you today on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation to another of what I think is going to be a very important program. We're talking about a film called No Asylum, which is an unknown chapter of the Anne Frank story. I wanted to start by thanking my friend Heidi Strauss of the Nevada Center for Humanity for having suggested this program in the first place and having connected me to today's filmmaker, Paula Fouce, whom you'll meet in a few minutes. I, of course, also want to thank today's moderator, Sharon Douglas, Jonathan Brent, who will be on our panel, and Sharon will be the moderator. She will introduce both Paula and Jonathan. I also wanted to acknowledge the YIVO Center for Jewish Research, which is co-presenting today's program and which Jonathan so ably leads. And I wanted also to thank our series sponsor, the Tamara Vandenberg Ferguson Charitable Foundation. So thank you all for making today possible. We are speaking about immigration. We're talking about the history of US immigration policy. And of course, we all know the Statue of Liberty and we know the Emma Lazarus poem, but the actual history is much more complicated than that. And the Frank family and so many others were caught in the crosshairs of political considerations that resulted in their doom. So it's a very sad, sad story. But fortunately, we have Anne Frank's diary that remains with us and always will. So Sharon Douglas, who is our moderator, is also our newest board member at the Sousa Mendes Foundation. She's helping us to honor the legacy of Aristides de Sousa Mendes, who was the Consul General of Portugal stationed in Bordeaux, France, during World War II. He risked everything to save complete strangers. He went against the edicts of his government and he issued visas to Portugal, allowing desperate Jewish refugees to escape Nazi-occupied Europe when they needed it most. My family was a beneficiary of these visas. My father was a child of 7, and I'm here today because Sousa Mendes did what he did. And of course, Paula's film talks about visas as being necessary for the salvation of people in those days. And it really was. A visa was life. So Sharon is the former CEO of the Anne Frank Center USA. She was a longtime board member of the Anne Frank Center. Anne Frank is her life. She'll tell you a little bit about how she got into it. And I'm so delighted that she agreed to moderate today's program. So Sharon, please take the floor.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Olivia. I'd like to tell you all how I come to be here. My English cousin, B. Klug of blessed memory, created the Anne Frank Trust UK, an educational charity supported by the members of the British Parliament to carry out Otto Frank's wish that his daughter's diary be used as a general force for good. It continues today to educate against racism and prejudice. B. Klug was awarded the MBE by the Queen for her work. B. enlisted me in the Anne Frank mystique. With her, in 1999, I attended the Anne Frank Declaration of Peace for the new millennium at the United Nations, and so this is my legacy. Today, we are going to talk about Anne Frank's family's fight for survival in human terms and with a background of history. Since the beginning of time, man's time on Earth, we have been migrating. Our need was always for survival, for food, for shelter. But today, and in modern times, migration of what we call immigrants became the need to survive against tyranny and oppression. It has been written by John F. Kennedy that of all the multitudes who throughout history have spoken for human dignity in times of great suffering and loss, No voice is more compelling than that of Anna Frank. Her diary has served as an inspiration for millions to believe in the power of one and to be your best self. So today we will highlight the plight of the survival of the Frank family. Otto Frank wrote letters to everyone he knew, friends, world leaders, famous people throughout the world, to help them obtain visas, but to no avail. Can we begin with Otto Frank in Frankfurt, Germany? You see a picture of him as a young man, the son of a banker whose family had lived in Frankfurt for centuries. About 1908, Otto was a college student at Heidelberg University studying art, and he met Nathan Strauss Jr., the son of the owner of the famous Macy's department store. And here you see a picture of Macy's and his father, Nathan Strauss. Nathan invited Otto to spend the summer in New York City and to work at Macy's as a window dresser. Otto loved New York, but his father became ill and he had to return to Frankfurt, and so his life began. We see a picture of Otto and Edith. He married Edith Hollander and had two daughters, Margot and Anneliese Marie, who we know as Anna Frank. Their life was good until it wasn't. And so in 1933, with the rise of Hitler, Otto realized he needed to leave Frankfurt. He went to Amsterdam, and soon his family followed. The girls went to school, and you see a slide of Anne in a Montessori class. The picture you see shows Anne's kindergarten class. Seated behind Anne is a child named Simon Felder, who survived the Holocaust and became the mayor of my hometown, Lawrence, Long Island, New York. And now we can get to the timeline of the letters written by Otto. And so we look at the slide and see that on April 30th, 1941, Otto Frank first writes to Nathan Strauss for assistance in emigrating to the U.S. But there were 300,000 applications waiting. So on July 1st, Nathan Strauss told Otto he needed to find a place where there's an American consulate to get a visa, but he could not find one. Otto then turned his efforts to having his wife's brothers, who had already gone to Boston, to raise money for them to attempt to go to Cuba. On September 8th, Otto writes to Strauss to explore the possibility of obtaining Cuban visas. On December 1st, Cuba issues one single visa in the name of Otto Frank. But on December 7th, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and all was lost. On July 5th, 1942, Margot received a letter to report to a labor camp. The very next night, on July 6, 1942, the Franks fled to the annex and stayed in hiding for 761 days. You will see a picture of the house and which was his business. Before they went into hiding, Otto ran a pectin business called Opikta on 263 Prinsengrantz Street. On May 10th, 1940, the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. Otto panicked and had to find a hiding place for his family. His office manager, Victor Kliegman, told Otto that the top floor of the building was unoccupied, and Otto prepared it as a hiding place for his family. This is what we know as the annex today. But their home had been at a different address on the Mayen Plain. On the right is a picture of Anne looking out at the window of the apartment. This is a still shot from film footage taken during the very time period when Otto was writing letters to Strauss and desperately trying to leave. Tragically, as we know, the family was discovered and sent to Auschwitz, with the girls later sent to Bergen-Belsen. After the war Otto came back to Amsterdam and discovered to his horror and shock that he was the sole surviving member of his family. But soon his former employer, Miep Geese, who had, along with others, kept the family safe and fed during their time in hiding, handed him Anne's diary. He soon realized that he had a new mission in life, which was to give his daughter back her voice and, through her diary, to let her live again. Our panelists, Jonathan Brent and Paula Fouce, will speak to you about Franklin Roosevelt and his policies, but I would like to talk to you about Eleanor Roosevelt. After the war, she realized that her husband's policies had been too restrictive, and she made it her mission to counteract his deficiency in his legacy. When Otto Frank came to the United States in the 50s, seeking funds to create an educational center in Amsterdam that we now know as the Anne Frank House, he turned to Eleanor Roosevelt and other prominent Americans for help. And you will now see a letterhead. And that is the letterhead of the committee that was formed, called the American Committee for the International Anne Frank Youth Center of the Anne Frank Foundation. Please look at the side and note that the incredibly distinguished chairwoman, Eleanor Roosevelt, and a member of the committee, notably John F. Kennedy. The house opened in 1960. On the next slide, you see Eleanor's words, because Eleanor was a passionate champion of Anne Frank's story. And in 1952, she was critical in helping to publish the diary, and she was moved to write its foreword. She wrote, "This is a remarkable book, written by a young girl, and the young are not afraid of telling the truth. It is one of the wisest and most moving commentaries on war and its impact on human beings that I have ever read." Our panelists today will explore the history of this time and the extraordinary finding of a banker's box from the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS, at YIVO that contained all of the letters Otto Frank wrote to everyone pleading for visas. Jonathan Brent has said that unlike Anne Frank's diary, which stands as a literary monument to every adolescent, Otto Frank's letters were not poetry or philosophy, but lessons for life. I had the opportunity to look at all of these letters, of course with white gloves, with Estelle Grusik, I believe, the volunteer who opened the box marked F and discovered them. What an honor. I would now like to introduce you to Paula and Jonathan. Paula is a renowned author and documentary filmmaker, including the well-regarded No Asylum, the Untold chapter of Anne Frank's story, which she created with the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. The film has been screened worldwide, including at the UN in Geneva. Her book, Not in God's Name, Making Sense of Religious Conflict, includes interviews with world-renowned faith leaders. Jonathan Brent is a historian, publisher, translator, writer, and teacher. Since 2009, he is the executive director and CEO of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. In 2018, he created the YIVO Digital Museum of Eastern European and Russian Life. In 2019, he received the Cross of the Knight of the Order for Merits to Lithuania by the President of the Republic of Lithuania. Paula, may I now turn it over to you?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Olivia. And it is a great pleasure to be here with the Sousa Mendes Foundation. We so appreciate it. I know that I've met Sharon in the past at the Anne Frank Center in New York's various events. So getting to be back with you again is wonderful. Getting to do the film, the first stop where research for Anne Frank and what happened to her family that we came upon was a Shoah Foundation, the archives of the many people who were able to survive the terrible being in the camps and coming out and being able to go with their lives again. And that's housed now at USC. And it was very easy to deal with being able to just get stories that people told, and they were interviewed in a specific way. So it was an absolute treasure box to be able to find everything having to do with people who'd known the Franks as a family or in the camps and who had survived. And that was the very first stop trying to make this film. And why it was difficult is because writing about the Holocaust or making a film about the Holocaust and Anne Frank after all these years, and after so much has been made on the subject, you had to find a new way to breathe life into it. And that was very challenging. And getting to meet Jonathan Brent and knowing about the YIVO archives where Otto Frank's letters were discovered when he was trying to gain safety for his family and escape from, the terrible things going on in Europe and get to the United States safely with his wife and children. And that was a great discovery, and being able to bring Anne's story to life and her family and Otto Frank's words to life when he so desperately was trying to get safety for them. That's why we really could make the film. Otherwise, it would not have been possible. So with that, I have to introduce Jonathan.
Thank you, Paula. The story of Anne Frank is well known. The story of Otto Frank was, until the discovery by Estelle Guzik of these letters, not known. And they're two different stories. One is the story of the resilience of this family and of this little girl in the face of this horrific danger. It's the story of maintaining their human dignity. It's the story of continued belief that somehow the world would come aright in the end, because there are people of goodwill who will prevail. The story of Otto Frank is a different one, because it's the story of governments and states and bureaucracies, and how people of goodwill, when caught up in those bureaucracies, often cannot act as perhaps they would if they were not in those circumstances. And what we see in the letters is a continual refusal of visas, of Otto Frank's visa request by the US government. It's never a flat refusal. It's just that the goalposts keep changing. When he satisfies one set of requirements, he then has to satisfy another set of requirements. The lady who would sign the letters to Charlie Strauss, Nathan Strauss Jr., Otto's friend, it was always with best regards, ever yours. It was never, angry or dismissive. And so the story that these letters tell is, in a way, a real tragedy of the modern period. And I guess what I wanted to ask you was how you conceived, when you found this stuff, when you found that these letters existed and that this whole other story existed, how you began to think about what the film, how to tell that story in the film. Because everything obviously, is how to tell the story.
Yeah, that was the challenge. I think that in film, you have to represent all sorts of stories and passage of time. And you are often hamstringed because of the cost of the archival materials. In some cases, it would be like $1,000 per photo, you know. And so we started to use this device of using a typewriter and having the actual words that Otto wrote come up on screen and just go throughout the film like that and pace the story throughout. And very interestingly, when you make a film like this, it tends to be sort of a magical situation where the people appear before you. You know, someone hears that you're doing this and they go, well, I just happen to know, Major Leonard Burney, who liberated Bergen-Belsen. You know, it was very, very interesting how people were brought to your doorstep, and getting to know about you, Jonathan, and YIVO, which is just a tremendous collection, and getting to go into the actual archives, see the letters that Otto wrote, and being able to film there. So the way it happened, you just go along and you try to do the best you can, and hopefully better and better methodology appears, and you can construct the story as you go along. Because sometimes when you make a film, the story is very hard to get a hold of. And interviewing you and Estelle Guzik, who actually found the letter, she was very exciting to interview.
One of the overriding themes, I guess you would say, that the Otto Frank letters brings to light is this problem of immigration in the United States. Was that something that you especially wanted to concentrate on? The Otto Frank was being turned away because, to put it baldly, because he was a Jew from Europe. And Jewish immigration into the United States had been almost entirely shut off in 1924 by the Immigration Act. That was the work of many intellectuals in the United States who were arguing that Jews and Italians were communists and imported dangerous ideas into this country. And the consequence of it was that the 7 to 10 million Jews in Europe had nowhere to go. It's really a terrible story of the modern period. And Sharon spoke of Eleanor Roosevelt's decision to try to change FDR's attitudes toward immigration. But it wasn't really even his own attitudes that were the issue. It was the feeling in the country at the time. So how did all this register on you? I wonder if this was new for you to think about in terms of Anne Frank.
It was actually, yes, it was new. And what I was really taken with was the remarkable story of how the United States troops had found these wooden, I believe, boxes with books on a train station platform after the end of World War II. And these books were stamped that they were headed to the Museum of the Extinct People. And that was just such a phenomenal thing to think about. I mean, you can't really think about these things because it overwhelms you. So trying to talk about it, trying to convey these ideas of what's contained in this collection. I think you said there's how many articles in the collection? How many millions of articles?
The YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York City has over 24 million documents in its collection. And it has a library of some 400,000 books. The photograph that was just up on view shows the crates coming from Frankfurt, Germany to New York City. And it shows Max Weinreich and two members of the Manischewitz brothers standing there looking at these materials. Max Weinreich is in the middle, and he's flanked by two of the Manischewitz brothers who helped to bring these across the ocean. Another part of YIVO's collection remained in Lithuania, which is why to this day, YIVO does a great deal of work in Lithuania. That was where we were born, in Vilna. It was Vilna, Poland at the time, now Vilnius, Lithuania. Yes.
And Sigmund Freud and who else were the founders of YIVO?
Well, Max Weinreich founded YIVO in 1925. This is our 100th anniversary year. And in 1945, to put this in a kind of perspective, in 1945, the YIVO Institute was the only surviving Jewish cultural organization of Eastern Europe. Wow. It was the only one that remained intact. And the reason it remained intact is that in 1939, Max Weinreich, one of the founders, was in Denmark. He was in Copenhagen for a conference. War broke out on September 1st, and he was told in no uncertain terms by his colleagues still in Vilna not to come home. And so he and his young son, Uriel, eventually found their way to New York City. In New York City, he took what was then a small YIVO office, and he made it the general headquarters of the YIVO Institute. After the war, it was all that existed. The reason that we are still here is that the US Army found these materials in Frankfurt. Now, because we had these materials returned to us in 1947, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS, that Sharon mentioned earlier, eventually that organization and many other immigration organizations in the United States sent materials to YIVO. And so we acquired all of these documents, and YIVO didn't have sufficient staff to process everything. And the consequence is that we had letters from Otto Frank that nobody knew about. They were literally just in a box, as Sharon said. And Estelle Guzik, who was in charge of trying to make sense of the HIAS archive and process them and get them into shape for public use. One day, as I believe she talks about in the film, one day she finds this letter signed by Otto Frank, and she does a double take. She said, could this be? Could this actually be the father of Anne Frank? And eventually she realizes that it is. So it was an amazing historical discovery. And it reopened the question of immigration and immigration policy, not just in America, but throughout the world. It's this timeline is a timeline on immigration. And the important thing about this timeline is that the immigration policy of the United States that takes effect in 1924 is really the product of what is called the eugenics movement, the movement to improve the race. It's race thinking. It is the movement from which Adolf Hitler derived his racial ideology. And the Eugenics Record Office is created in Cold Spring Harbor, New York in 1910. In 1912, it holds its first Congress in London with delegates from the US and Europe. And it's important to note that there were European delegates, particularly British, to this Congress, because Britain had very much the same policy eventually that the United States did. Then in 1916, one of the founders of the eugenics movement, Madison Grant, wrote the book, The Passing of the Great Race. And I just want quickly to read a segment from it that helps to put this into perspective. The Passing of the Great Race, Madison Grant wrote in 1916, was designed to rouse Americans to the overwhelming importance of race and to the folly of the melting pot theory, even at the expense of bitter controversy. Most of us believe that America is the melting pot. We still believe this. Most of us believe that this is a country that welcomes immigrants from all over the world. But in 1916, there was a very powerful movement that was directed precisely against this idea. Why? Because, as another very important eugenics advocate wrote in one of his books, Bolshevism is an inherited characteristic of the Jewish people. It's inherited, and therefore they must be excluded from this country. That is a direct quote from Lothrop Stoddard's book, The Revenge Against Civilization, The Rise of the Underman. And it was his use of the term underman that gave Alfred Rosenberg the term Untermensch to describe the Jews. In 1918, World War I ends, prompting the creation of many eugenics organizations. And then this coincides with the Russian Civil War and the Russian Revolution of 1917. And in 1920 to 22, Henry Ford publishes articles on the international Jew, the world's problem. Why? Because a white general from the Russian Civil War comes to the United States and gives Henry Ford a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which has been shown to be a fraud, but purportedly it shows that Jews want to take over the world. How are they going to do it? Through communism. Through communism. And so Ford publishes articles, he creates a magazine, newspaper, The International Jew. It is, as Hitler writes, his Bible. In 1924, partly because of the constant agitation of people like Madison Grant, who is a very distinguished lawyer in New York, the founder of the Bronx Zoo, a very well-known environmentalist who saved the redwoods in California and the bison in the West. Because of his actions, his publications, and the constant drumbeat that American civilization is going down the drain because of immigration, that the US Congress enacts the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act, establishing the quota system that effectively slams the door on immigration from Eastern Europe. 1929, the Great Depression begins, unemployment and nativism skyrockets. And this nativism is hand in hand with the eugenics movement. In 1929 to 35, the US implements repatriation campaigns, deporting more than 350,000 people. And in 1940, the America First Committee is created. So there is, and this timeline coincides then at the end with the difficulties that Otto Frank experiences with the Refugee Board in the United States. So Paula, that is a lot to deal with, but you found a way of doing that. And I think the film is very successful in the way that it handles all of these materials. You integrated many different voices into telling this story. Were there any particular parts of the story that you felt more sensitive than others in terms of how you could present them to an American and indeed a world audience?
Well, indeed, you know, when you're dealing with a Holocaust, there's so much of terror, you know, there's so many terrible images. The imagery is very upsetting. And Eva Schloss, she's the sister of Anne Frank, although stepsister of Anne Frank, who did a lot in our film, because her father ended up marrying her mother, ended up marrying Otto Frank later on, when whoever was left alive out of their families who survived Auschwitz. Eva herself, who was in Auschwitz and had her mother, her father die there, and several of her family members, she said that she felt it was all right to show these images, even though they're so terrible, because people should see what really happened and what really went on. And it is such a terrible thing. And what is truly remarkable is how a 15-year-old girl could write a diary that would bring the reality of her feelings to the world, and with such a universal message, where she is an icon of tolerance and respect, and just people like Mother Teresa, or like that, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Martin Luther King, and the Dalai Lama, and Desmond Tutu, and she's there with those sort of people in our society even today. Her words live on. People all over the world read her book, and it's remarkable. It's just a remarkable story. So having to bring that to life as much as we could, and yet bring through the terrible truth of what happened. And
I just want to stop you there for a second, Paula, because it actually took a lot of courage to tell the truth of what actually happened, because the truth of it is not so pretty when you think about American immigration policy at the time. And I can tell you that we do a lot of Holocaust education programs at the YIVO Institute. And I was working with a Holocaust teacher, I believe in South Carolina, but I'm not positive about that. And I don't want to slander any state. All that I know, all that I remember, when I asked this teacher, are you experiencing, do you have any problems in teaching Holocaust, the Holocaust? The teacher said to me, no, we can teach whatever we like, but we can't say anything bad about America. And so this whole story that you've created a film about would not be something that that teacher could use in his or her classroom in the United States of America today.
Yeah, I think that's a more recent thing though, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So I'm sure it'll flip back again. You know how sometimes in society things go through extremes back and forth. Really, the middle ground is usually the best. But yeah.
So I want to have time for audience questions. So maybe we'll stop the dialogue there and we'll come back to it once we get to the Q&A part of the program. Right now, I just want to tell the audience a little bit about what we have upcoming at the Sousa Mendes Foundation. And we're going to see a trailer for our film of next week. And so let me just have the floor for a moment. So today's program focused on a famous victim of the Holocaust, Anne Frank, and her family. She's sort of a symbol. Next week, we're focusing on probably the most famous survivor of the Holocaust, who himself became a symbol, and that's Elie Wiesel, both of whom wrote very important books that will live forever. So next week, we're showing this film. It's called Elie Wiesel's Soul on Fire. The filmmaker is Oren Rudowski. It's a must-see film. And we have one of Elie Wiesel's students who will be on the program. We have Judd Newborn who will be moderating. And I do urge all of you to sign up. 2 weeks after that, we're having a book launch for this wonderful new children's book. We've been promoting it. I'm going to continue promoting it now. It's called The World Entire. It was written by the American children's book author Elizabeth Brown and illustrated by the British artist Melissa Castrillon. And it's a terrific, beautiful book about the Sousa Mendes story and how the Talmud says, whoever saves a life saves the world entire. And it's just a delightful book. I'm going to flip through it a little bit so that you see it. And we're going to put links into the chat box on how you can order this book about how Sousa Mendes lost everything and saved people that he didn't even know, complete strangers. And it's a way to introduce young children to this very moving, very uplifting story of how one person can make a difference. Okay, so we're putting links to our upcoming events. We're having a book launch, which is free of charge. The book itself does cost money, obviously, to order it. You would get a signed and inscribed copy to the child of your choice, or maybe to yourself. But right now, we're going to see a little trailer to the film Elie Wiesel, Soul on Fire.
When you ask people today, many don't know Elie Wiesel. Time erases memories.
One of the things that every survivor has to face and does face today is the fact of its own survival. He somehow is ashamed of still being here.
In my small town, I knew where I was. I knew why I existed. Now, I no longer know anything. As in a dusty mirror, I look at my childhood and I wonder if it is mine.
It was my father who kept me alive. We saw it together. I knew that if I die, he would die.
At one point, I decided to write my testimony.
I wrote it for the other survivors who found it difficult to speak.
I thought he would never have children.
We had one date and we both knew that it was going to be. He had told me from the beginning he didn't want children. I convinced him.
What have I learned in the last 40 years? I learned the perils of language and those of silence. But I've also learned that suffering confers no privileges. This is why survivors have tried to teach their contemporaries how to invent hope in a world that offers none.
Why I write? What else could I do? I write to bear witness.
Okay, so now to your questions. And before we launch into the questions, Sharon, is there something that you would like to ask our speakers?
Yes, I'd like to ask Paula, how is your movie and student guides and professional development used in classrooms throughout the United States? And what do you believe to be the message that can be transmitted to young students based on what Jonathan spoke about, how hard it is, this subject matter, and of knowing that the government did not allow the visas to happen? How is that taught in the classrooms through your film?
Our film is available, and we have a version for education. I think it's for 11 years old and up, or 12 years old and up.
Yes.
Doesn't have all the terrible imagery. And the children I was around when they saw it, they remarkably were just captured by it, and they were enthralled, and they really understood. I think because at a young age, you're not, you haven't gone through all these years of seeing what we've gone through. You know, it's remarkable sometimes when you hear how people obviously don't understand that some people don't understand that we are all one, we are all alike, we all have the same blood flowing in our veins. Children, I think they are more at home with that message. And I think that the film affects them very, very well. I think it's very well received.
How much professional development did teachers need to be able to discuss the subject matter? And I know that you have a set of guides for teachers as well as a press kit. And I know if there are any educators that are out there in our audience, that they can get them through you.
Yes, that would be wonderful if they can contact us, and or Susa Mendez Foundation can let us know that they'd like to be in contact.
And as I remember, you pared down the movie so that it went from 90 minutes to 40 minutes, so that it was applicable to a classroom time schedule. But my feeling was that when we worked together, how do you educate teachers to understand the soul of what was happening?
I think that they do understand it because of the guide that was provided, that we developed. I think it was all geared towards them and written by professionals and developed exactly that way, so that teachers could, easily take that material and make it useful for children.
So any school district would be valuable for them throughout their school districts, throughout departments of education throughout the United States that are mandated to teach the Holocaust, to get your film as a jumping point, because it comes with the greatest guide and the greatest lesson plans that are geared to the course standards. So when they're writing their lesson plans, they don't even have to do anything. They just look at them, right? And they're off and running, and they've fulfilled the obligation, and they've learned something along the way.
Yes, that's right.
Jonathan, wasn't there a certain controversy when these letters were first found, because they were social service files of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society? They weren't supposed to be public files. Normally these files, if you are a direct family member, you can ask to see the files, but wasn't there a controversy about making this public? And can you tell us about that?
Well, there was a controversy, and it did have to do with making them public. We felt at YIVO, and I was not director at that point, my predecessor, Carl Rhines, made the decision, and I think he made the correct decision, that these letters were of overriding historical importance and therefore needed to be made public. We went back and forth with with Hayes, and then with the Anne Frank house and the estate of Otto Frank, and eventually it got worked out. But yes, initially there was considerable resistance to making them public, not on the grounds that they were politically sensitive, but on the grounds that this might set a precedent for making private immigration materials public in the future.
And along those lines, it's not searchable, right? Nobody can go on the YIVO website and find their family name in these files because the indexes are all internal. Is that correct?
It's correct that these materials have not been made public so that you cannot go to our website. But if you come to YIVO and use our internal database, you can do those searches.
If you're a family member or a researcher or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, question for Paula. How did you find that cousin of the Anne Frank family, and is he still alive?
Buddy Elias. No, Buddy passed away. I think it's been about 5 years ago. He was just a remarkable person. He was a professional actor, and he even performed in circuses a lot when he was young. And he grew up with Anne, and we went to the home in Bern, Switzerland, where Anne Frank and Margot and her mother and father, they would go vacation before all these terrible things started happening. And Buddy is just a remarkable man and very colorful, loved to tell the stories. He went with us to Bergen-Belsen and walked around there, and he was delightful, absolutely wonderful. And his wife was as well. So he was very helpful, and getting to see the little chair where Anne would sit, in their vacation home there, and the bedroom where Otto Frank would sleep, I believe. So it was amazing.
Question for Jonathan. The Manischewitz brothers, same as the wine, correct?
Correct.
Or is that question in the chat box? Just wanted to be sure.
Yep.
How did these letters, in fact, end up at YIVO?
They ended up at YIVO because the highest organization, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society organization, wanted to place their archives such that they would be preserved forever in a safe place, in proper conditions. And YIVO was the logical place to send these materials because we are the main archive in the world concerning East European Jewish history. I saw a question in the chat. What do we have in all those boxes? We have 24 million documents about the history of East European and Russian Jewish life, from water carriers to rabbis, from Bundists to Zionists, from Yiddish theater to Hasidic songs. And that's what we have. We have the largest collection of material on the Holocaust outside of Yad Vashem, 7 million documents.
So YIVO is located at 15 West 16th Street in this beautiful brownstone that you share with other organizations. It's called the Center for Jewish History. where just at this moment, there is an Anne Frank exhibition, not organized by you, but in the same building, where they recreate her secret annex. And personally, I saw it. I thought it was breathtaking, and I urge the audience members to go see it. Even though it might make your building a little more crowded, I still want people to go and see it. So we're just a few minutes until the end of the hour, so I wanted to give all of you the chance to say some final remarks. So maybe, Jonathan, if you want to say something in closing to our audience, now is the time.
To me, the question is, how is it possible to prevent something like this happening again? Especially today, at a time of the rise, the catastrophic rise of anti-Semitism around the world, at a time when Jews are again being accused of being communists in America as well as abroad, at a time when the Jewish people is under a kind of blanket attack, as it was in the 1920s and 30s, partly because of the war in Gaza, partly because of the attitudes about Israel and its policies regarding the Palestinian people, and many, many different reasons. But the point is that around the world today, the Jewish people is in a state of crisis, unlike any since World War II, before World War II, since the 1920s and 30s. Jewish intellectuals are not allowed to speak at events. Jewish artists are not allowed to perform. Musicians are not allowed to perform. Galleries will not show Jewish painters. This is a very serious thing for the Jewish people. How do we prevent something like this? I think we have limited tools. The most important is education. Paula's film is a very important element in education. But there are other stories beside those of Anne Frank that people need to be aware of. And Matthew, if you would show the slide of Yitzhak Rudashevsky, I would appreciate it. Because this is a diary, the diary of Yitzhak Rudashevsky. He was the same age as Anne Frank. And he was born in Vilna. And at the time of the war, he and his family were put into the Vilna ghetto. And here he wrote a diary, a day-by-day diary, until the point at which he was taken from the ghetto and finally shot in Ponari, which is just outside of Vilnius. His fate was different. His life was different from Anne Frank's, but it is a story that is precisely the same. It is about how you preserve dignity under the threats that he faced. I would hope that people will take from this show and from Paula's wonderful film a resolve to do everything they can, however they can, in teaching their children, in voting, in clamoring for social change, to ensure that this does not ever happen again.
So we will be running a little bit over. I do want to give Paula and Sharon a chance to make some final remarks. So audience, if you could stay a little longer, that would be fantastic. Paula, what would you like to say today in closing to our audience?
I'd like to say that we are delighted to have this film be used for education. And if anyone would like to send an email to the Sousa Mendes Foundation, and I could receive it from them. And we do have, someone had asked in the chat about subtitles. We do have the educational version available in about 7 or 8 languages. One of them is even Polish, which Eva Schloss herself was the one who wanted that translated into Polish. And we would be so delighted to have you use the film in this way and the educational program that's been developed. So please just let us know.
Sharon, the last word goes to you.
Thank you. My final thoughts. Since colonial times, people from all over the world have wanted to come to America. Some came because they were starving. Some came because they were being oppressed. Some came to America because they were persecuted because of their religion. My people came from a small town of Vitebsk, same town as Chagall, which was in the Pale of Settlement. Many people use the expression beyond the Pale without knowing the origin. The Pale was a territory in Russia in which Jews were allowed to live, subject to frequent pogroms. Jews were not permitted to live beyond the Pale. My grandfather lost his entire family to a pogrom and fled to America, where he started a new family. The words of Emma Lazarus, enshrined on the base of the Statue of Liberty, meant everything to him. All of the people who come here see those words, wherever they come from. It is sad that everyone who needs to come here cannot come to America today. Perhaps the takeaway from today might be for each of us to make the world a better place in memory of all those, like Anna Frank, who wished to come to America and perished before they had the chance. Please remember Anne's most memorable quote: "Human greatness does not lie in wealth and power, but in character and goodness." I would like to also say, Paula, that I knew Buddy Elias kind of well, and I knew Eva, and I still do, Eva Schloss, for 30 years through my cousin B, and I call her on her birthday every year on May 11th. This year she wasn't able to speak, but her daughter picked up, and she loves me for sending and remembering her, and she loves all of us for remembering Anne. I also encourage everyone to take the time to see the Anne Frank exhibit at the Center for Jewish History. Thank you, and it was an honor to moderate today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sharon, Paula, Jonathan. Thanks to our beautiful audience. Love you all. See you
Thank you.
next week for Elie Wiesel.
Yes.
Until then, be well. See you
Thank
soon. Bye-bye. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.